Hi, I'm Jeremy Reimer. The story of the personal computer is a triumph of human ingenuity. It brought the data processing power once reserved for governments and banks to individual people. Here at Microhistory, we'll be uncovering these tales and revealing the people who made this triumph a reality. But today I want to answer a question. What was the first personal computer? It seems straightforward enough, but answering this question is actually impossible because of the way invention actually works. It's not like things are just created out of nothing from a single solitary genius. Usually inventions come from many different people all working at the same time. Their devices are improved and changed very rapidly until they end up with a stable set of features. Thus, the first of anything is actually a series of firsts. But let's try to answer the question anyway. To find the first personal computer, we first have to define what a computer itself is. The earliest known use of the word computer was in 1613, used by English writer Richard Braithwaite.
I have read the truest computer of times, and the best arithmetician that ever breathed, and he reduceth thy days into a short number.
What did this mean? A computer was a person who made repetitive mathematical calculations, usually on paper. Of course, this was tedious and error-prone, and people were always looking for ways to make this easier. The first machine to aid in calculation was the abacus, invented in ancient Sumeria way back around 2400 BCE. It spread to Egypt, then Persia, then Greece and Rome and China. It was a collection of beads on metal rods and made calculations easier, but it wasn't a real computer. Something a little closer to a computer was found in Greece, dating back to 100 BCE. It was called the Antikythera mechanism, and it used the technological innovation of gears to calculate future astronomical events, like eclipses and the positions of the planets. It is the earliest known example of an analog computer, something that could take inputs, the positions of the dials, do calculations, the internal workings of the gears, and produce outputs, the positions of planets on the disks. As innovative as this machine was, it was a one-off. It couldn't be mass-produced like, say, Byzantine Empire cargo ships. There were no factories that could produce the gears accurately, nor was there a large enough market to demand more of them. Computing had to wait nearly 2,000 years until the Industrial Revolution for these two issues to be resolved. In 1642, Blaise Pascal made one of the first successful mechanical calculators, using brass gears to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. He built over 20 such machines in the next decade. Not quite mass production just yet, but more than a one-off. In the next few hundred years, many more mechanical calculators were built. In 1822, Charles Babbage was working on his own advanced mechanical calculator, which he called the difference engine. But he got distracted by a much bigger idea. In 1833, he started something called the Analytical engine, which was to be much larger and more complicated. Instead of just adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, it would be able to perform much more complicated tasks by sequencing together lists of instructions. The Analytical engine had all the parts of a modern computer. It had a store, the equivalent of memory, which could save up to 1,000 numbers with 50 decimal places. Next, it had a mill, the equivalent of a central processing unit, or CPU, which would perform calculations on these numbers, as well as comparing them and making decisions based on the results. The mill was programmed with a series of punch cards, which would let the machine perform different tasks. Ada Lovelace, considered the world's first computer programmer, created sequences of instructions for the mill that would solve various problems. Unfortunately, Babbage never succeeded in making a working version of the Analytical engine. The issue was the technology. The gears needed to be precisely manufactured, otherwise they would jam when the machine got too complex. But that level of precision wasn't available at the time. As an aside, The Difference Engine by William Gibson and Bruce Sterling is an alternate universe novel that imagines a world where the Analytical engine actually worked and the Victorian age was transformed when the British used these massive machines to administer their growing empire. But back in reality, a different approach was needed for computing. It had to wait until a new technology was available: electricity. The solution was found using a device called the relay, which was invented in 1809 for the then new technology of telegraphs. A relay made it possible for long-distance telegraphs to boost their signal by letting a weaker signal close a switch in a different circuit with more power. Konrad Zuse, working in Germany in 1938, designed the first digital computer, the Z3, using 2600 relays. He finished it in 1941. It weighed about a metric ton, consumed 4,000 watts of power, and cost about 50,000 marks to build, which would be approximately 400,000 US dollars today. The German government failed to give him additional resources to improve his computer, and it was destroyed by Allied bombing during the war. On the other side of the Atlantic, the American team of John Atanasoff and Clifford Berry used a revolutionary new device called the vacuum tube to create a prototype computer they called the Atanasoff-Berry computer, or ABC, which was completed in 1942. Vacuum tubes worked like relays, but instead of a mechanical switch, the presence of current inside the tube either allowed or blocked the flow of current in another circuit. Tubes were much faster and more efficient than relays. Many other teams were hard at work during World War II to build computers out of vacuum tubes. The main reason for this research was to calculate artillery firing tables, but there were other uses as well. The British Colossus, built in 1943, was designed to crack the German Enigma codes, and in doing so helped end the war. Most of the Colossus programmers were women who were sworn to secrecy until decades after the war ended. The ENIAC computer, built in the United States in 1945, was the first general-purpose programmable digital computer. The inventors, John Mauchly and J. Presper Eckert, hired teams of women mathematicians to write the actual programs, including Jean Jennings, Marilyn Westcott, Ruth Lichterman, Betty Snyder, Frances Bilas, and Kay McNulty. These women not only had to write the programs, but invent the concept of computer programming itself, following in the footsteps of Ada Lovelace over a century earlier. ENIAC was originally built to calculate firing tables, but it ended up being used for many different tasks. The last significant evolution in digital computers was the concept of storing programs inside the computer itself. The first stored program computer was the Manchester Baby, which was built in 1948. It was intended as a small-scale experiment. Back then, a baby computer took up only one wall instead of an entire floor. Let's step back and look at how difficult it is to talk about the first of anything. In a span of less than 10 years, we have the first electrical-mechanical digital computer, the first fully electronic digital computer, the first programmable electronic digital computer, the first general-purpose programmable electronic digital computer, and finally the first general-purpose programmable electronic digital computer with stored programs. The Zuse Z3 can be called the first computer, but it's not until a Manchester Baby that we have a computer that has all the important features that we associate with computers today. From then on, all computers would be fully electronic and capable of running multiple programs that could be stored on the computer itself. So is the Z3 the first, or is the Manchester Baby the first? The answer is yes. Now that we've definitely answered the question of what was the first computer, we can move on to finding the first personal computer. None of the first 5 computers I talked about were remotely personal. They were built at great expense. To be personal, a computer had to be affordable by a single person. These computers were all one-offs, each one a unique device to be owned and operated by governments or large institutions like universities. But the idea of owning your own personal computer was a powerful one, and it didn't take long before people started trying to make it happen. The post-war world was one of rapid technological progress, and the increasing popularity of science fiction made it seem like people could make their crazy dreams a reality. Practically, there were 2 ways to bring the price of computers down to personal levels. You could drastically reduce the functionality of the bigger computers, or you could wait for new technology to make the functionality of the previous generation of big computers available in smaller, cheaper packaging. The first personal computer used the reduction strategy. Radio Electronics magazine published a set of plans in 1950 which would let their readers construct a simple electronic computer, appropriately named Simon. It cost about $600 in electronic parts and was small enough to sit on a desk. It used relays, already an older technology, but a less expensive one. The computer could only handle numbers from 0 to 3, and users fed in data and programs using paper tape. The answers to problems were displayed on a set of lights on the front of the machine. Plans for constructing the kit were later sold as a separate item, making Simon technically the first commercial personal computer. It didn't do very much, but still, 1950. Only about 400 of the plans were sold over the next decade. It was a first in many ways, but it wasn't something you could just go into a store and buy. That would have to wait for another 2 decades, and for a new technology called the transistor. Transistors were invented in 1947 by John Bardeen, Walter Brattain, and William Shockley. They used different types of treated silicon, known as semiconductors, to perform the same switching tasks that vacuum tubes did. But transistors were cheaper, far less likely to burn out, and could be made much, much smaller. The Kenbach 1 was invented in 1971 by John Blankenbaker, working for the Kenbach Corporation. It used the new technology of TTL, or transistor-transistor logic. These were silicon chips that contained groups of transistors collected in a single package to form a set of logic gates, like OR, AND, or exclusive OR, which are the basic set of building blocks for personal computers. The Kenbach 1 cost $750 US. Only about 44 units were sold, mostly because of lack of marketing. The company itself went bankrupt 2 years later, but it was a first on the way to the personal computer. The most important technological leap that made the personal computer possible was the microprocessor. This was invented by Intel in 1971. Their first release, called the 4004, had about 2,700 transistors on a single chip, about the same number as the Z3's relays, but in a package smaller than a fingernail. The 4004 wasn't good for much, other than calculators and traffic lights, but the next chip, the 8008, was powerful enough that people started thinking about building computers around it. One of the first ones was the French Micral, the first mass-produced personal computer using a microprocessor. It came out in 1973 and cost 8,500 francs, or about $1,750. A more affordable computer based on the 8008 was the Mark 8, the first microprocessor-based personal computer to be featured on the cover of a magazine. It was released in 1974. Unfortunately, only the main board was available for purchase. The rest of the parts, including the Intel 8008 CPU, had to be bought separately and soldered together. The total cost for parts came out to about $500. And at last we come to the final first personal computer, the Altair 8800, which came out in 1975. The Altair could be purchased as a kit for $439, or fully assembled for $621. The Altair was the first personal computer that had all the basic features we expect today from a modern desktop at an affordable price. While the base configuration was bare bones, lacking a keyboard, monitor, or storage, the main advantage that it had was that it came with a bunch of expansion slots. In these slots, you could add memory, interfaces to printers or display terminals, or anything else you could imagine. The Altair even had a programming language, BASIC, written by a small company called Microsoft. BASIC had been invented on mainframes and mini-computers that cost hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, but this was the first time that a high-level programming language was available on an affordable personal computer. BASIC was the gateway to the personal computer industry. It led to the creation of third-party software companies that could write useful applications and sell them to small businesses who couldn't afford a larger computer. And it also enabled games and other entertainment software to be written as well. The success of the Altair led to the creation of personal computer dealerships, distributors, hardware add-on companies, personal computer conventions and clubs, third-party software and software manuals, and basically everything else that we associate with the industry today. Again, let's take a step back and look at the progression of the personal computer. The first personal computer sold only as a list of instructions was the Simon in 1951. The next milestone came with the Kenbach 1, the first fully assembled personal computer that was sold in 1971. Then came the Microl in 1973, the first fully assembled personal computer with a microprocessor. Then the Mark 8 in 1974, the first affordable personal computer with a microprocessor. And finally the Altair in 1975, which was the first expandable, affordable, fully assembled personal computer with a microprocessor. This list of 5 first personal computers isn't even remotely exhaustive. I've deliberately left out machines like the ENIAC, the Heathkit HC1, the Minivac 601, the Honeywell kitchen computer, the Paperclip computer, the Imlac PDS-1, the HP 9830, the Intel Sim4, the SCLBI-H8, the amazing MCM70, and the groundbreaking DataPoint 2200, which looked like it came from the future and defined the feature set of the Intel 8008 and thus influenced the direction of all personal computers to come. The Simon was the first of the firsts, but the Altair was the last of the firsts. The Altair became the template for the personal computer. It spawned hundreds of imitators, all vying for a piece of a brand new industry that the Altair created. This was reflected in the sales numbers of the Altair computers. The other first personal computers sold at most a few hundred units, but the Altair went on to sell over 25,000. This led the way for future personal computers to sell in the millions. The story of the Altair is a fascinating tale and will be the subject of the next video. Stay tuned for Microhistory Episode 1.
Electricity.